This is Writer Life, a podcast about writing, life, coffee and conversation with Rob and John Morgan.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of Writer Life. I've been on a small break over the festive season because as much as I like to lock myself away and write, there are times where family is far more important. And I do actually feel that the festive season is possibly one of the most important times to be close to those that you care for the most. So we come into January having had this relaxing, fun-filled break, and we start to look forward. We start to look to the road ahead and see what a new year will bring. I've also been working on some new stuff, and I'm doing a lot of work behind the scenes on a new book, as well as I'm looking at what will be the works that I'm going to publish this year. And shortly I will actually start to begin work on doing all of the final editing and preparations so that I can get these books as perfect as possible, and then I can release them and publish them later on in the year for all of you to enjoy. And it's going to be an exciting year, I think, because you're going to see the third book of the story Heartland, of which I'll have a little bit more about that in one of my upcoming episodes. One of the good things about turning away from the writing computer and having a break is, not only do I get some downtime and a chance to kind of like clear my thoughts, I can relax, but most importantly, I can also socialise. And, it helps me to do a bit of a catch-up on the sort of things that I actually enjoy reading online, such as many blogs, watching other YouTubers, and I do have a good route around and see what people have been posting on social media. Although, to be honest, it seems like for every 9 posts, one's social, and the other 8 are all advertising or suggested, which I actually find really, really frustrating. I'm not really that sure that I ever fully switch off the writer side of me, because I do read a lot of things, which most of the time sparks conversations with either my wife or any visiting friends. And from that, I usually end up with a pad and a pen, making lots of notes for things that may provide interesting aspects of life to include in a new story. Writing really is a constant process. Even when I sleep, at times I find myself nodding off with a book idea still lodged deeply in my brain, and at times I've dreamt about the scenarios that I have created. It's almost as if while I'm asleep, the book is writing itself in my mind, ready for me to wake up the following day and start typing all of the new material that I'm working on. Part of my time off over the festive break has included catching up to date with a lot of current affairs, which I cannot deny, I do try to stay on top of, because in some areas I have actually fallen behind. And so for me, the festive season has actually allowed me to make some improvements on the blogs that I read and take a really good look at actually the world today, and look all around me and look into other countries. And that's what I've been doing for the last few weeks, and when I do this, I can't help it. I kind of apply my post-apocalyptic writer's eye to each and every subject that I look at. And I find that I've come into the new year asking far more questions than I ever actually expected. I'm a huge fan of Arthur Conan Doyle, who is actually the creator of the character Sherlock Holmes. And he believed that every good writer has to be part detective and also devil's advocate. Now, I can't deny, this really suits me down to the ground, because I love nothing better than pulling things apart and examining them and getting both sides of the story, because that basically is how fiction writers work. We need to figure out all of the puzzle and then give one half to one character and the other half to a different character, in order to be able to pit them together against each other in opposition throughout a story. Now, the problem with that is, when I look at current affairs, I cannot help it. I question a lot of what I see, because in my mind, I'm only really getting one half of the story. And that really does apply actually to today's modern media, because they don't tell us everything. They don't show us everything. So when you go on social media, you get to see a different side of the coin. And I can't help it. I naturally ask, what is the other half? What is not happening or happening that I'm not aware of? Because I've read enough and I've watched enough over the years to kind of work out that if it's going live on mainstream media, then there is a far deeper tale to be told than what they're actually showing us. Most writers, we tend to get lumped into a box with other conspiracy theorists. And I've always found, that can be a little bit unfair, because I'm not so dumb as to instantly believe one point of view. And I always question everything. No, I do actually know a few conspiracy theories. I've had some very interesting and long conversations, and they actually find me quite hard work, because I'm not easily convinced. And so if somebody wants to convince me of something, well, they better have a very long list of good quality facts to show me. Otherwise, I'm not going to believe a word of what I'm told. And as a result, I will probably actually go out and go digging into this subject so that I can simply satisfy my own mind. A fiction writer has to be able to gather facts and then interlock them to create a sound narrative. And so I naturally expect that of others. But I cannot deny, having spent a good few weeks playing catch-up on what appear to be unrelated aspects of the world today, I've started to question a few things about, what direction exactly is the world going in currently? Some things today that are happening do not really add up. And I'm finding this is causing me to ask far more questions than I expected. Because when you start looking at things like net zero or climate change, immigration, digitalization and farming, or even modern Western culture, and you look at them as separate topics, you do start to ask a few questions. But then when you put all these questions together, it starts to create what is a very interesting topic for debate. And it's within that I have topics that will play out well in fictional stories. I look at what is going on in the world, especially in my own country of the UK, and I find that I'm never short of interesting things which can be manipulated and recreated in a story, albeit a slightly different context. Modern writers should have no shortage of inspirational ideas at the moment. We literally are surrounded by them in what has become a very crazy world. Now, a few years back, we saw the trucker protests in Canada, and what turned out to be actually a pretty authoritarian political will to crush them. And it's not unsimilar to how Mason tried to deal with the woodland realm in Heirs to the Kingdom, or how he actually dealt with his kind of imprisoned walled cities with the workers of places, like we saw in North Yorkshire with Meghan and her family. It's kind of interesting at the moment, because today, as I prepare this, Germany is at a standstill because people have risen up in opposition to their governments, spurred on by the farmers in unison with truckers, rail workers and even civilians. And they've actually blocked the roads and dumped manure on the steps of the government building to show their disapproval. I mean, Germany really is absolutely standing still. And it's not unsimilar in many ways to what has been happening in Holland over the last year. Because they faced a government who were hell-bent on destroying traditional farming practices. Spain has also seen its people on the streets in unprecedented numbers for, well over 70 days, protesting what they see as an authoritarian government which is taking their freedoms away. And they brought literally most of the country to a standstill as people are now demanding change. There seems to be some sense of freedom in the air. I cannot deny, watching the footage on independent media, which is being live streamed as it happens, it's quite a startling thing to see, the kind of levels of anger that are in all of these people. It appears the people are feeling separated from their uncaring, careless, unfeeling governments. As we've seen the same in Poland, where the opposition government have actually been arrested. Even Italy and France in recent times, have had their kind of uprisings. And Romania's also sort of boiling away behind the scenes. And the world is becoming a very, very unstable and very unsettled place. Now, back in the UK, we're seeing our streets packed with people in support of Palestine. They're blocking the roads and chanting anti-Semitic songs and statements, and they're doing this quite openly in front of the police as they desecrate our monuments and statues with all of their graffiti. And it is upsetting the ordinary common people of the UK. And in some cases, this is causing quite a lashback. The police have come under a lot of fire in recent months, because they've been arresting the common UK man, and yet they're allowing these protesters, who to a degree are breaking the law, completely free rein, and they're pandering to them. And I'll not deny, it really is worrying, because the flashpoint is close, and it could all flare up to literally become a war on our streets, because people have had to put up with this now for over 2 months. And to be honest, they've had enough. The people of the UK have never seen anything like this before. I mean, we don't allow such hatred to be open displayed on our streets. We're normally a very reserved people, and we're certainly a very tolerant country. But currently things are heating up as our government is doing very, very little to, but encourage it. And it appears like the police are no longer on the side of the majority of decent people in this country. Now, where will this lead to? I can honestly say at the moment, I've absolutely got no idea. But once again, this is the sort of thing that can inspire a writer in their works of fiction, which is based on real life happenings. It's just set in a different time and space. Current affairs have always been the biggest influence for writers. And again, if there are other writers out there who are listening to this, take a really good look, because I can absolutely assure you there's a really good story somewhere in all that is happening around us. There's been a lot to catch up on, and I've done far more reading in the last month than I think I have in the last 4 months. And it's not been disappointing. Now, just last week, we had a so-called sighting of an alien or two in Miami, in a supermarket, or a shopping precinct, I think they call them over there. Now, the blurry footage is, it was soon up online, creating quite a stir. And I cannot deny, this caught my attention and my interest. And I took a good long look at it. Now, to be honest, it's very difficult to say what has really happened. The witness accounts that have been posted online are really interesting. But was it an alien group, from some other interdimensional world? Well, I've got to admit, I'm not really convinced. But I'm going to follow the media coverage of this, and I'm going to see where it goes. Because, whether it's true or not really is irrelevant. Because from the point of view of a writer, the point is not whether or not it's real. The writer's job is to make it real and to fashion it in such a way that it's utterly believable. In a similar way to the way that I did that of the Nairn in Hans Cottage. Now the story, be it real or fake, is actually the starting point. After that, a writer can bend and twist the narrative enough to create something that grips at the mind of a reader. It's not so much about, is this true or fake? It's more about, is this an idea that I can work with and build upon to create a realistic story around it? Now, just to jump back to Arthur Conan Doyle, it was his time in Devon during the war that inspired probably one of his greatest stories. In his time there, he was warned about the dangers of the mires on the moors, and he actually did visit the jail that's on the top of Dartmoor. Now from that time, living in what was a pretty bleak landscape, he used what he saw and heard as the basis for one of the most thrilling stories he ever wrote, which was The Hound of the Baskervilles. Now, it's a complete work of fiction inspired by real life, and that is sort of the point of why watching the world and following different types of stories and current affairs is actually the key to inspiration when you're writing. Today, things are not great for people. Times are harder than they've ever been before, and there's certainly an awful lot of division in the world, and that all adds up to this heady mix for the likes of me, who's looking at old times for that one new angle that will inspire the creative process and give me a story that is actually worth telling. One of the most toxic issues that I read a lot about is that, of course, of global warming and climate change. It's a difficult river to navigate these days because the simple truth is people are seeking the truth, but they don't really know what the answers are. Now, as a human being, I've got no issues with wanting to preserve and protect the planet. I've spent a lot of my life involved in campaigns to do exactly that. But as an avid researcher, I cannot deny looking at some of what has been proposed via organisations such as the UN, the WHO and the WEF, I'm a little bit dubious, because a lot of what we're seeing is causing me to question an awful lot of things. I'm concerned at the push to remove cash from society. Cash, it serves a purpose. One it served for thousands of years. Our whole heritage is based on one form of bartering and trading or another, and cash has become a big part of that. It concerns me how political banks have started to become. I mean, normally these are like these invisible people who handle the money, and yet now they're in the public spotlight, and they're actually saying what their preferred ideologies actually are. And quite honestly, they're using some very favouring views of the above three mentioned organisation, which when you examine them and peel back the layers, quite honestly, they do appear to be somewhat authoritarian and very communist in their thinking. Now, I'm a lover of dystopian novels, but when it comes to a few things going on in society that I'm actually seeing in real life, I think, to be honest, life today, we're actually seeing a real life dystopia actually happening in front of us. Now, I've already shared some of those views on a previous podcast. If you look at episode 27, Dystopian Views, you can see where I've questioned a few things that are actually quite concerning to me. But when it comes to the global elite and their views of all of us, I've asked, and possibly will continue to do so, how is it exactly that these unelected bodies suddenly have all of the power? What happened to government? What happened to democracy? It does sort of bother me, not only as a writer who opposes censorship, but also as just some ordinary random bloke. Why is it that most of the governments today are all singing to the same tune at the same time with the same message? such as one example, Build Back Better, which we've heard for like the last 4 years, which just happens to match in with the views of the WEF, who 5 years ago were saying that. I'm a writer. It's what I do. I ask the obvious questions as I seek out a narrative that I can actually write about. After all, if you look at books like Brave New World or 1984, or even Dickens for that matter, all of those authors watched the world at that time and made up their tales around what they were actually seeing happening in real life and how they thought about that at the time. They pondered how the world was going to turn out. That's what writers do. We project a fictional reality, and we hope we get it so close that it's close enough to real life so that it's believable. H.G. Wells does an amazing job with the time machine. He actually very correctly predicted nuclear power and 2 world wars long before they actually happened. Now we're told we're all going to be living in 15-minute cities, only be able to buy 3 items of clothing a year. Most of us will not be allowed to fly abroad. And we have to give up our cars, as all our digital currency will be linked together with our ID and our digital health certificates. And we'll also have to list, all our spending, because that will then be taken into account in what are to become our new carbon credit system. And all from under a microchip that's been implanted in our arm, and then logged and monitored by even more CCTV and facial recognition technology. It really is all very dystopian. And the weird thing is, it is no longer a story or a fantasy. This stuff is actually in the process of being implemented. It isn't a fictional tale. It's becoming real life. If you look at these organizations like the United Nations and like the World Health Organization or the World Economic Forum, they originally started or planned a good while ago something called Agenda 21, and that's now morphed into what has now become possibly one of the most significant dates on our calendar, with Agenda 2030. Have you noticed how everything has to be achieved by 2030? And if you actually look at what's being planned, what is going to happen is we're all going to see what is the traditional life that we all know completely end, as the powers that control will take over and make all of these decisions about how we live. If it was not for real life, I would say, it would make a brilliant novel. And yet the writer in me it questions it. It's what I do. I pull stuff apart and see how it works, and then I look at all the things that can go wrong. Things do ultimately go wrong. Well, that's usually the start of a very good story, and so I deliberately go looking for it. Now, my big issue with the current sort of global politics, it's not that I'm against saving the world. Let's be honest, it's our home. I think we should do everything we can to save it. But it appears to me that all of what is being forced upon us, because it is being forced, because none of us have ever voted for this stuff, is that everything is to the will of a certain group, and everything appears to be going what they now call smart. Now, SMART stands for Self-Monitoring and Reporting Technology. We're all being sold some dream of an easy life with smartphones, smart cars, smart meters, smart city, smart banking, smart insurance, and a whole host of other so-called smart ideals. And the daft thing is, none of these things will actually benefit any of us if we're all linked up to a carbon credit system. All of this technology serves only one purpose, of those who pull the strings, because it gives them even more vital personal information on who we all are as human beings, whilst we all sit at home in our utopian lockdowns, because that really is what they're actually offering us. An extended mix of what we had to endure throughout 2020 and 2021, which, by the way, has now been proven beyond doubt that from a mental health standpoint, it was actually detrimental to society as a whole, and especially to young children. And yet this thing for 15-minute cities is being rammed home. Self-reporting and monitoring is literally straight out of the 1984 handbook. No wonder the people across Europe are in a revolutionary mode, because over there things are far more advanced than either the UK or the USA. But you know what? It is coming. It's on our government's agendas, all partnered with the WEF. Now, I've asked the question, what is it monitoring? And just who exactly is it reporting to? It's funny how nobody wants to answer my question. And yeah, I'm putting together a work of fantasy that will show all of the bad things that can actually happen if the system is abused. Now, if you look at, the corruption of the political and elite classes today, I think it more than likely this system they're trying to force us into will be abused one way or the other. If you take a step back, we are in some very uncertain times at the moment. But if I'm completely honest, I've sort of enjoyed digging through the many blogs and articles that I've read. I mean, I hate saying it, but bad news makes for great books and tales to be told. And no matter what I read, as there is a lot of this stuff on the web for the writer in me, it bringing me back to my dystopian roots with Heirs of the Kingdom. I kind of get some joy out of it. In the 5th book, I wrote about the origins of what became my killer disease, the Red Death, which I actually at that time based on the 1918 flu pandemic, which killed up to 60 million people. Now, the crazy thing is, when I first started to consider the idea and put the story together, which was somewhere around the late 1980s to the early 1990s, I was completely unaware of one fact, that actually the Spanish flu was not even Spanish. It was actually started from a vaccine that was created in America to give to the troops heading to the First World War. And I really didn't know that. Now, obviously, this vaccine that they were given back then, it didn't work. And it had the dire effects of it infected the population. And it spread, and it raged throughout Europe. And then with the end of what was World War I and the celebrations that followed, especially in the USA, it spread, and the deaths that were caused by the vaccine were actually in the millions. And I didn't find this truth out until 2019, when I was already 3/4 of the way through writing the very last book of the series. And it's kind of weird because in the book Heirs of the Kingdom, it's Hearn who manufactures or artificially creates the Red Death. And now I know that what was the Spanish flu was actually artificially created and used as a vaccine, which infected everybody and spread. It's kind of cool and it's kind of scary, because it was very, very, very similar, and I didn't find out about it, as I say, until 2019. Now, little did I know that actually a year later, we would all be caught in a similar event with what became the last pandemic and 3 years of uncertainty, fear, and to a large degree, as we now know, deception on a huge global level. Now, the thing about the writer's life that is most fascinating is what I call the what if factor, which is usually where I take a subject and I look at several, different outcomes for it, and then I ask the question, what if? Because that's going to be the story that I write. In 2020, I cannot deny, I kind of looked at the world with a little bit of horror, because what I was seeing, well, that is exactly what I'd done with Heirs to the Kingdom. I asked, what if a virus could wipe out the largest percentage of humanity? And I then detailed that in what became the opening part of the 5th book. And there was a lot of similarities. In early 2020, it was pretty unnerving reading as I realised a large percentage of what I'd actually written about, which was the fall of humankind, was actually happening in real time on my screens and on my hometown streets. My scenario was almost right, and that's actually scary, and also a little bit thrilling, because I did get an awful lot of things pretty much spot on. And and when I first started writing these things back in the 1990s, I had no idea how accurate it was, and that's what actually makes writing such a fascinating and deeply rewarding pastime. Writers do occasionally hit the nail on the head. Now, the best part of this is that you can then, as a writer, look at and create solutions and possible outcomes. I think it's the greatest gift of a writer. People can read what they write, and in some odd kind of sense, it can help them feel a little bit prepared. I like to sit back and really look at things. And when you see governments being told and ordered by the likes of the unelected UN, WHO or WEF, and they're being told that we need to remove gas appliances and log burners, and they need to be replaced with heat pumps, or intimidate farmers off their land and hand it over to the large corporations to remove meat from the food chain and our diet, and then replace it with bug powders, and everyone should convert to veganism. All these people demand and prevent off-gridders from living a sustainable life, growing their own chemical-free food, and they're forcing them now to hook them back up to the grid. One starts to wonder if this is really about saving the earth, and it's not more about some form of authoritarian control from unelected people and the profits that they will make, because they're all part of that sacred 3% of the world's richest elite. It really bothers me that everything is being pushed into electric. Now, we all know that solar and wind can only produce at the moment 3% of the power we use. And realistically, if we want to do this and we triple that, it's only 9%. So that'll still leave us lacking 91% of our current daily needs. There's little, or at least there's not enough, nuclear. And they're demanding already that coal power stations are closed, and they're forcing our governments into that. And I have to wonder why the world is not remembering the Carrington event of around, I think it was 1859. It's startling to know that people really do not actually know anything about the Carrington event. I was taught it in school. It's no longer taught. And this is considered to be a once in every 100 year event. And the last one was actually in 1859. So we're almost, at the 100th year. Well, actually, we're at the 200th year. The Carrington event was caused by a solar storm. It was literally an explosion out of the sun that hit the Earth in 1859 in a huge magnetic pulse, which back then completely fried all of the telegraph system. At the time, it was a huge problem But there again, back then, we were nowhere near as dependent on electric power as we are actually now. And there really is no government that is taking this seriously. Because, it's not a case really of if this is going to happen. I think it's very much a case, because the sun is unreliable, of actually saying when it will happen. One of my biggest concerns with the world today is this mad dash towards what is net zero or Agenda 2030. I mean, it really does concern me that everything is being pushed towards using only clean electricity. And yet power grids currently are nowhere near capable of handling what are the sorts of demands that are going to be required to live in a world of all electric. Now, if you add to that, because this is what I do, I'm a writer, I find faults. So if you add to that, everything connected is based on computer-based systems. It's also now becoming AI-driven. Then we're already looking at a world that I think will become more and more fragile and at risk. I get tired of reading about hackers, but they have to be considered because they are a very real threat. We already know that China has attempted to hack into the US, and it's actually hacked into the American power grid. I mean, they didn't do anything, but they got in. And that's concerning. We're constantly told about Russian hacks and their attempts to get into our systems. And that's even before we even start to look at the many kinds of criminal gangs that scam and fool people on a daily basis. I mean, I've seen in the last 5 years, I've seen banks shut down. And they've gone down for a week because their computers have been hacked. We've seen supermarkets change because the tills stopped working. It's kind of worrying. In a world run entirely on electric, what do we do if the power is hacked by some sort of, player, and then it's taken down? Even without a terror event, the Carrington event repeating is equally as credible a threat. I mean, under a Carrington event, microchips will literally fry. Absolutely nothing computer-based will function. And you look at cars today, they're all computer-based now, so they'll stop. Electric cars are definitely going to stop because their electrics are going to get toasted. Bank systems will fail. The lights will go out. There'll be no water pumped into your home. For me, this is a perfect scenario to write about because, let's be honest, who does not like a really good survival story or a world's going to end tale? We've seen many in the past. I grew up reading them and watching films about them. A big hit on Netflix recently has been the movie produced by the Obamas. Leave the World Behind, it's called. I mean, it's huge at the moment and it's going viral. And I can completely understand why. Because from the point of view of a writer, I've been talking about this amongst my friends for quite some time now. What do we do when there's no power? Could we really survive? Or do we all just curl up in a corner and die? There are a lot of conspiracy theories out there who are saying that 2020 was some sort of rehearsal for a worldwide event. And in many ways, 2020 has actually shown us some insight to this, in so much as we saw how the rich would ran to the supermarkets. I mean, they cleared them all out. They cleared the shelves of everything in some sort of like mad hysterical panic. I'll never forget when I went in to my local supermarket. There was people there with 4 and 5 trolleys full of stuff. Nobody got the toilet rolls though. I mean, that's the one thing even I didn't see for the rest of the kingdom. But the truth is, the poor hardly got a sniff in, because they just didn't have that kind of amount of cash for such large purchases. And they soon find that there was very, very little left to buy once the rich had cleared everything out. If you look at it, the supermarkets do not stock for long term. I mean, we saw that. Within a week, they were empty. and are waiting for new supplies. But without power, how do they get them? If there's no cash and all the internet is down, and we only have digital currency, well, how do we actually pay for goods to begin with? With no power, water is not pumped, neither is fuel. And if we all have electric heat pumps, as Agenda 2030 demands of us, well, how are we going to stay warm, or even cook for that matter? This film is based on a book, although I'm not sure who the author actually is. But it looks to me like there's another writer out there who is pretty much asked all of the very same questions that I've been asking. And I feel that's actually a good thing, because this film has really made people sit up and think. And to be honest, it's good, and it should do. When you start reading stories on Twitter, which is, well, formerly Twitter, which is now X, and you read about people like Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook, and then you find out that they're building multi-million pound bunkers under their homes, you know, and you have people like the UN, the WHO and the WEF, and they're all talking at the moment about how in the next few years we could realistically see a power outage. I think you've got to start paying attention. You know, are they hinting at something? Are they aware of something that we're not? I mean, after all, these are some of the richest people on the planet. And they know far more about what's really going on than we will ever do. I would suspect they've got a hand in far more than we actually know. And that's kind of concerning. The one thing I know is if the power goes out, everyone will instantly become equal. Digital will be useless, and a huge amount of people will be powerless. Now, if I was a billionaire, I would spend my money while I still could, which is currently what we're actually seeing with the elites. As a writer, I think it's pretty safe to bet or to assume the very rich are investing in some sort of prepper mentality, and they're actually lining their nests for the long haul. When the power goes out, the internet goes off, food runs out, there's no radio. We already know people will turn on each other. We've seen it. There will be anarchy. And a great many people, you know, they're going to die in unprecedented numbers, because as a population, the global population, I'd say a good 80% of us are nowhere near educated enough or prepared enough to know what to do when the shit hits the fan. In Heirs to the Kingdom, I speculated that the fall of man would happen quickly, and society would crumble very, very fast, and within a few months the whole world would look very, very different from how it did. If you have a big hidden bunker and months' worth of food and supplies stashed privately away, realistically you could ride it out. And so I ask, is that the plan of those who know what may happen in the future? Now that is where I began my fictional dystopian fantasy, Heirs to the Kingdom. And honestly, I really hope that I'm wrong on this. But this is all part of a writer's life. And it's what I do every day, sat at my desk, looking at the world and finding new ways to create a complete mess. And that starts a really good story. And I start to write it. I do have a few different kinds of story on the go at the moment, you know, and simply putting this episode together, it really does actually make me wonder, do I need to get on with them and get them published soon? Because you never know, just like me when I was a kid growing up, there may be a time that a good book has all of the clues to help us survive. And that is where the fun is, because nobody really knows for sure, or do they? It's a really great fun thing to speculate about. There's some great conversations around this subject, and that is the magic of writing and reading. To all of you who have tuned in and listened to this today, thank you very much. It's greatly appreciated. I sit here at my desk in the middle of nowhere, completely remote from society, and I prattle on with all my speculations, and I hope there's someone out there listening. If you have, I'm absolutely delighted. I do try to keep these things interesting and unusual, and I hope create talking points and make people think, because even though this is like a podcast episode, that's kind of the point of books. From books we can learn so much more about different ways of living, and I actually think, looking at the world today, we all need to start reading a hell of a lot more books, because they've got the clues to how we get through it all. I'll be back next week with something even more interesting. I'm working on Violet Stone at the moment, which I will be getting out next year, and I will be doing a podcast shortly to give a little bit of a look at why it's such an important story and why I'm so excited about getting it published. And I'll have that with you very soon. So until then, or until next week, I will see you then. Have a very peaceful, happy week, and I will say goodbye for today.
Thanks for listening to the Writer Life podcast. If you have enjoyed this episode, or there are areas of Robin's stories you would like him to discuss, please add your thoughts and questions in the comments, and we will include them in a future episode. You can follow Robin on all his social media links, which you will find listed below, and please, like and subscribe to this channel, so you get the latest notifications when he posts. All Robin's books are available in digital and print formats to purchase or download through all online book sales sites.